This is Glenn Loury, everybody. Thanks for tuning into The Glenn Show. I'm with John McWhorter, my regular conversation partner here, and we are joined by Clifton Duncan. Clifton is an actor, classically trained. I'm looking at the CV here, a Master of Fine Arts from NYU's graduate acting program. He's a podcaster. He has performed on and off Broadway. He's got some credits on TV shows and such. And he writes and talks about the arts and politics. And we're very glad to have him here with us on the show today. September 20th, 2025. Clifton, the world spins out of control. Well, I wonder what it's like on your beat in the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk and what with all of the political turmoil that's going on. But I also wanted to talk with you about a project that you've been involved in for a bit to mount a one-man show organized around a tribute and impersonation of Thomas Sowell, the economist, my colleague at the Hoover Institution, where I'm a distinguished visiting fellow. Tom is in his mid-90s now and has a long, distinguished career as a scholar of race and culture and political economy in the spirit of the classical liberal tradition that one identifies with the Austrian School of Economics and with the Chicago School. Tom Sowell, Black man. And I want to check in with you about that work. But in any case, let me not talk further. Welcome to the Glenn Show, Clifton.
Well, hello, Glenn. Hello, John. It's good to see both of you again. And well, thank you for saying that. I was just thinking the other day about when I met John in person, and he was very annoyed. People kept recognizing him in person. Are you John McWhorter? He was very, very sick of it.
That Brooklyn
I felt
event?
very bad for him. The event in Brooklyn, right?
This is the sort of thing that I know it sounds so la-di-da, but that can get exhausting. And at that particular event, it got to the point where I literally was kind of hiding behind walls and posts sometimes so I could breathe a little bit. It was flattering, but it was exhausting. Yeah.
No, I get it, John. I get it.
I'm going to tell on you, John. You remember that Heterodox Academy event out in Denver?
Yes.
John made the organizers create an exit for him so that he could get out of the room before the crowd converged. He and I were doing a set piece interview kind of situation up on the stage. There were like 300 people or more in the room. They love us.
It was very flattering.
But John needed an escape route so he wouldn't have to do the glad handing afterwards. And I got stuck with the interminable, oh man, you're great. We love you, which I didn't mind, frankly.
Yeah, eventually one gets tired of being revered. So I understand what happens. It's a very difficult life to live.
We're going to get so much
dirty
shit
job
for this.
So we're only a few minutes in. Why don't I switch browsers and I'll be right back. Is that okay?
All right. Yeah, that's okay. Come back, Clifton, shortly. John and I will continue without you. What do you make of the Jimmy Kimmel situation? I was just looking at Matt Taibbi and Walter Kern and learned what I didn't know, which was that Kimmel's days were numbered anyway because of pure, I think, ratings assessment dynamics.
I didn't know that, but
I don't know if for a fact. It's just something I heard somebody say.
The idea that intelligent people would pull his show so abruptly because of pressure from that movement and basically from the White House is like something out of a book. I mean, it's like something out of the 40s, and we think of it as something that happened in black and white with people walking around in suits and hats, and now it's happening now. It's frightening. Same thing with Karen Attiah. I mean, she's repulsive. Just
Is this the Washington Post woman?
Yeah, but she was pulled for the same kind of reason. Don't say those sorts of things about our people. That's scary. I thought this only happened in German. We're really at a weird time.
Well,
Clifton is back.
Yes.
Clifton Duncan, actor extraordinaire. Born in Heidelberg, by the way.
Correct.
I just happen to know that.
Speaking of Germany, right.
Well, if I may chime in, I don't know if you wanted my 2 cents about things.
Yeah, we want your 2 cents.
Yeah, you asked me on, but it's before we came on, John said something about this not being a world that he recognizes, and I believe that he's right about that. And I think he's right about that because there is from my perspective, there's a brand new paradigm that's emerging, and I think part of that paradigm is a collapse of, I don't know what the proper term would be for it. Maybe if we're using Sowellian language, the vision of the anointed, but there seems to be a major change in terms of the social vision. I was reading, or the dominant social vision. And I think one shift in that is technology. I think the public now has a voice. I think these institutions, which before have been responsible for the vast majority of the dispensation of information and ideas, are being challenged by anyone with a microphone right now, or anyone with a Substack. I mean, everyone has a Substack, so pretty much anybody. But so there is a level of control, I think, over the discourse that no longer belongs within these sort of vaunted institutions now. And I think part of the impact of that is that the Overton window is shifting, and what people can say and think is shifting. And there's an exposure, I think, where normal people now see that, wait a minute, what I think, I'm not alone. And I don't mean it's people who are like, trolling on 4chan or something and talking about the Jewish question and how women shouldn't vote. I mean, it's regular people who say, you know what, I actually do believe in God. I am a Christian, and I value my family. I mean, it's sort of pedestrian views that people share, but which are not shared by many of the people. I think, I guess Sowell call them the intelligentsia or whatever. I call them the bourgeoisie sometimes.
The bourgeoisie.
The bourgeoisie. And I think after the events of last week, a lot of people are feeling very energized and very radicalized by that, because from their perspective, the deceased was someone who represented not just his own views, but views. I think I see people saying that he was murdered for his views. I think that's incorrect. I think he was murdered for the views that were assigned to him by people who were being a bit disingenuous and lying about and misrepresenting his views in some instances. And that's a major part of the problem. But I think that seeing him, watching this river of black blood shooting from this hole in his neck, really, for espousing opinions that are shared, maybe by our grandmothers, maybe by people in our close social circles, really affected people in a big way. And it was sort of a turning point. I hate to use what could be considered a pun, but if people say, okay, they are willing to escalate to this level, not for saying that, I see there's a quote going around about him saying black women having lower intelligence or something. And you see the full context and you say, okay, well, I see what he was saying, but I don't know if I agree with that. And I just think that it is a new world in the sense that there is a large contingency of people who feel very not represented in these institutions and sort of talked down to for a long time. And they're saying, no more of this. And now you're killing us. And we're not going to take it anymore. So I struggle with not trying to jump on the division train, but I also struggle with, I see ugly forces on both sides. I don't want to both sides it because it's annoying to me, but there's things that are bubbling up. And I think part of the reason is because there are way, way, way more cooks in the kitchen as far as the national discourse and conversation. And one machine is dying and another is rising, and there's a big power sort of vacuum now. Maybe that's what's going on, or part of the issue.
Do you know who funds the websites where you get your news? How often have they been wrong in their reporting? What kind of stories do they consistently leave out from their coverage? I think these are pretty important questions. You can find out the answers at Ground News. It's the website and app I rely on daily to stay informed, cut through the noise, and get closer to the truth. Visit ground.news/Glenn Show to see for yourself how it works. My favorite feature of Ground News is the blind spot feed. It shows you stories that are disproportionately reported by either the left or the right. About 20 such stories every day. Here, for example, is a headline you're not likely to see in left-leaning outlets. House Republicans propose Silver Dollar featuring Charlie Kirk. And here's one that doesn't get play on the right. Vance on Tylenol. Pregnant women should follow your doctor. For both of these and for every story, Ground News gives you a breakdown of the sources covering it, the bias of the media outlets reporting across the left, center, and right, how reliable these sources have been in the past, and who owns them. This is the kind of news analysis you won't find anywhere else. Right now, my viewers can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan, which is the same plan I use. Make sure you subscribe using my link at ground.news/Glenn Show. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code when signing up. That's ground.news/Glenn Show. Well, let me weigh in. I'm not unsympathetic to what you just said, Clifton. Revenge of the normies. I mean, tired of being lectured by Joy Reid. Tired of people telling us that we're beyond the pale because we think Jesus is Lord, because we think trans is crazy, because we think life begins at conception, because we worry about the implications for the nature of the country of unrestrained immigration, because we think affirmative action was bullshit, and it has been for a long time. But we've been afraid to say so because crime is out of control in inner cities. They really are going to hell in a handbasket. Trump is right. Because the barons, the culture barons who control the media, who run Hollywood, who are at the helm of the Democratic Party, who create these rules that we're not supposed to violate, who cancel us for legitimate objection. It's time for them to get their comeuppance, and this is some of the energy that's behind the reaction when our Tribune, a guy who speaks for us, a guy who is an embodiment of what it is that many of us think, even though it's not, we're deplorables for thinking so. It's gone down in cold blood. And it sounds to me like you have not a small amount of sympathy for that sensibility.
Well, it's, you use the term we there, and I'm assuming it's not the royal we, although maybe perhaps it could be. My views on issues such as, for instance, gay marriage or abortion or even religion itself, or tradition, so to speak, didn't align with Charlie Kirk's. And there were people who are saying online, saying, it doesn't matter if you agreed with him or not. And I think, no, right now it actually does matter to say that, there are things that I didn't align with. I think part of the issue is that I think people are seeing that even if they have some sympathy for his views, they feel vulnerable now to attack. If one would dare to entertain such views without accepting them, then what does that mean for me and my professional and personal safety? And if I am someone who understands that sexual dimorphism is real and it's a very conventional and objectively true view, I shouldn't be suffering for that, suffering consequences for that. And so I think people are on edge and saying, like, look, we tried to be as tolerant as we could be, and we've been accommodating for quite some time. And now that does not seem to be enough. And so in terms of my sympathies, and as someone who has himself faced the mob and its consequences in its own way, of course I'm sympathetic. I see people, I just said the other day, I posted about 6 or 7 friends of mine, all artists and entertainers who each have been canceled in their own way. Just in the past 7 days, I had 3 friends of mine say one is contemplating ending her own life because, she's been hounded out of her hometown and by trans activists, and they harass potential employers so she can't get work in the field she's been in for 50 years. There's another friend of mine who was canceled by her own company that she founded because she dared to recognize again the gender, the sexual binary. Excuse me, I want to use my language carefully as I can. And she's a very accomplished choreographer and dancer, and she's her funding is drying up, and people don't want to work with her. They don't want to be associated with her because the well has been so poisoned. A third friend of mine, I don't want to say too much because it just happened, but he auditioned for a job at a very big symphony orchestra, and he beat out all the audition, and he documented the entire process online, which was really fun for him to watch. Wonderful man, really smart guy, brilliant clarinetist, a woodwind player. And they sent him a rejection letter saying that they're rescinding his offer because some things have come to light. What were those things that came to light? Well, he's a Republican. And so this kind of thing has been happening for quite a long time. It's still happening. I saw a lot of right-wing pundits beating their chests after the election saying that quote unquote woke is over, which they can't really define what it is anyway, but they say that it's over. They declare it's done. And meanwhile, if you work in the arts or you work in any of these, if you're a cultural worker of any sort, you know that there is still a lot of gatekeeping going on ideologically. And so again, if you're someone who's been on the other end of that, then you understand where this sort of schadenfreude is coming from right now.
The thing that worries me about all this the most is that didn't happen to Rush Limbaugh. What happened to Charlie Kirk. And my sense is that there wasn't much chance that it was going to, as despised as he was by a great many. That wasn't the tenor of it. And yet there are a lot of similarities between those two men. And really it comes down to these goddamn phones and social media that allows that kind of dogpiling where it wouldn't happen before. And then there's also the copycat phenomenon where, for better or for worse, Taylor Robinson is now a celebrity. And you can see this as opposed to it being yesterday's news story after a while. And so I am really worried that we're just going to see more of this sort of thing because of tortured young boys wanting to do something special and being tortured and therefore not recoiling from doing something like that. And then there's just the level of anger. And everything you're talking about, Clifton, it's real. And this resentment of what I've always called the woman in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who runs a liquor store. I always say I'm not sure she's as politically engaged as we make her, but there is certainly online she's not online that much, but online there's a great deal of resentment of being, fingers wagging in your face. And it gets stoked up by social media in a way that it couldn't before. And so it's a really scary thing. I have often thought, this is oversimplifying it, but I've often thought at some point, somebody who's on what you might call the woke end of the spectrum, and I know that Robinson is an unusual case, complicated case, but somebody on the woke end of the spectrum is going to do something violent in the name of battling power. Now it's happened. And I see no reason why it would only happen once. Maybe this will be a turning point, but I'm not sure where we would turn at this point. And so that's what really scares me. It's Dylan Roof, that's something. And that happens and it keeps happening. I thought it's going to come from the other side one of these days. And here we are.
Well, if I can weigh in on that,
Please do.
I think it's a multitude of factors. One of them, I think the difference between a Rush Limbaugh and a Charlie Kirk is that a Rush Limbaugh came along at a time before, John, as you were alluding to, social media and everything began to take off, and we became more atomized in our different sort of echo chambers. The algorithms weren't feeding us, that dopamine drip of what we need and our confirmation biases, right? And there were only a few networks to watch, and the conservatives really they owned talk radio at that point. This is how they own the podcasting space in a lot of ways right now. These are the few spaces where they were able to really sort of vent their spleen freely and talk over these issues that are important to them. But I would argue this is part of my theory, I suppose you could say, is that part of the issue has been this push to make the personal political and the political personal, where to the extent where politics no longer stays within the realm of politics or policy. Like we're literally making political issues out of our chromosomes and gametes. You see what I'm saying? So it wasn't just enough to talk about race and sex in the past. It wasn't just enough to talk about gay rights in the past. It had to be about things as intimate as who we are as a species. And you can't watch I think the saga with the WNBA is actually a great example of this right now. I've been following what's been going on with that sport. And to me, it's one of those examples where you see how what I perceive to be an ideological mission can kind of clash with opportunity in a way and growth. And the discourse around the league right now, there's so much of it that's about race and gender and sexuality when it's not about basketball. And I think it's one of those things now where you're like, man, you can't even watch women miss layups without without talking about these progressive talking points and without talking about white privilege. I mean, to take a minute example, 10 years ago, there was a controversy that became known as Gamergate. And the name itself is just ridiculous, but so was the controversy itself. And it began as internet drama, and it ballooned into this big culture war issue in a big way. And at the core of it, it was people who play video games, who are some of the most benign and really sort of diverse populations, nerdy. It was in the past, they were outcast. Now games are more mainstream. But if people don't know, in the past, when you had gaming publications, it was basically, interviews with developers, what's coming next, cheat codes and reviews for games and letters to the editor, these kinds of things. And but then there came a point where it became about white privilege in gaming, representation in gaming, more LGBTQ these kinds of things where reviewers would harangue and the consumers and developers now are tweeting about fascism and everything. And so it's like I can't play Mega Man now without thinking about white privilege. I can't play Mortal Kombat, because the developers now, not I can't play, but the Mortal Kombat now that they've desexualized the female characters, but it's a game where you see people be disemboweled. It's Mortal Kombat. And so these weird values have emerged where every aspect of our society and our existence has been permeated with these ideas that I guess you could ascribe to the progressive vision or the left-wing vision of the world. And people are saying, okay, you've done this with law enforcement and criminal justice. Now people are being let out who are repeat offenders, and these women are being stabbed to death on trains. You've implemented these policies in academia and in education, and now Black children are illiterate in Baltimore and in Chicago. You have these movies you make that are undergirded with these ideas and ideals, and they keep bombing over and over and over again. You have these IPs, or these classic IPs, right? That you've been trusted with, whether it be Star Wars or Indiana Jones or Doctor Who. And you keep infusing them with these ideals, and they're just failing and they're not connecting with the audience. So I think part of what's going on is, yes, you can say it's the smartphones. Yes, you could say it's these young boys, these wayward young men, but also it's been a cultural push through multiple institutions, again, responsible for information and ideas and knowledge and decisions, if you want to bring Sowell back into it. That have been pushing ideas that affect us on a personal level. People are saying, I'm not dating you if you have different beliefs. You can't come to Thanksgiving, or I will attack you across the Thanksgiving table because of our political beliefs. These issues now affect us on a personal level. And I think that's part of the reason people are saying, no, I'm tired of this and I'm pushing back. I'm a normal person. I want to get a good job. I want safe streets, a good economy. I want my kids to be able to make some money and take care of me when they're old. I want them to be happy. I don't want to be talking about whether or not men can be women or not. And I don't want to be persecuted for saying that they can. And so I think part of the backlash, John, is that now everything now feels fraught with these issues, which in and of themselves aren't really political, but they've become political, and it seems so pervasive and ubiquitous that you're swimming in it all of the time. And there's no escape. And so these smartphones just make that even worse because it's with you all the time in your breast pocket. You know what I mean? So it's a much bigger issue, and it's why I say that our problems really can't. I don't think they can be solved politically, and I think what you're going to continue to see. And Sowell was writing about this in a book that I might mention later. I'm concerned that one side will say, "Oh yeah, well, here now you. How does it feel when it happens to you?" Which means the other side will then say, "Well, they're becoming even more radical and more threatening and more scary. So now I have to escalate." And I think we're in the process of things just getting worse before they get better. That's what I think we're at.
I wonder how you'd react to the following. The right is winning. Your lament about cancel culture and the imposition of wokeism on normies is outdated. That was yesterday's news. Today, Trump is president. Today, DEI is dead. Today, the power of the government is being mobilized to suppress wokeism. And we're actually at a point of jeopardizing our core institutions and legal and traditional protections. And true, it's the excesses that you analyzed are facts, and people, yes, might be enjoying some schadenfreude at watching the ship of wokeism go down. But the real deal going forward is state suppression of freedom of speech. It's the institutions of the press being coerced and cajoled and intimidated by thuggish type behavior. It's universities having their funding, quarantined because they don't adhere to the right-wing agenda. You're 5 years out of date.
Gentlemen, I want to jump in and just add something. Clifton, this is quick. I suspect that historically, when people look back on this 25 years from now, they're not going to think that woke ended in 2022. I think it looks that way maybe to you and me, Glenn, because it moved from race to now trans, which is a lot of what Clifton is talking about, and Gaza, which we have talked about. And I think it's just as virulent there as it was when it was about George Floyd 4 and 5 years ago. And so I think both of those things are going on, which means it's the same question people were asking us back then. What about what's going on from the right? Although what's going on from the right is worse now than it was then. I'm done.
What do you think, Clifton?
Well, I think, I'll say to you, Glenn, what I've said multiple times, which is that one election doesn't change anything. And I think I never agreed that, it's such a played out term now, but woke. There was one point in culture where before it became mainstream, it was like, yeah, bro, I'm woke. This is, it was a cool thing to be. And I know people still think that, but now once your conservative grandpa's talking about, we need to end woke, like it's culturally dead. It's done. But
that horse is out of the barn.
It's done. It's played out. You hear the code switch now when I talk about it. But it's it's. But one election, an administration can change, and they can re-implement and reverse any policies that they wish. And again, one thing I appreciate, and one thing that I've learned in my research for just exploring Sowell's work helps a lot. But I think in terms of the grand scheme of things, and realizing that it's a conflict of visions, and then it gets to these broader questions about bureaucratic interference and state power and the role of the state and these kinds of things. And so I don't think it's out of date to talk about. You can feel me cringing every time the word comes out, but to talk about woke or whatever, because it's also a mistake to think that one election would change that. These are ideas that are hundreds of years old that find themselves repurposed in new forms. I mean, I pissed off the left and the right. This was a long time ago, and I said trans is the new black because
trans is the new black.
I said trans is the new black, and people didn't. This was like maybe a couple of years ago, a year or two ago. People were like, they didn't get what I was saying. And what I was saying is that they've turned trans into the civil rights movement of the era. And on the right, people were saying like, don't try to, put that on us. We don't like none of that, yada, yada, yada. And, but I was like, no, that's what's going on. And I think the issue is about trans specifically because it can very easily devolve, right, into talking, you get into the, what's that guy's name? I think Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, who says, transgenderism shouldn't even exist. And it's just like, well, human nature, human experience. I mean, it's a broad range of things, and you can't just be like you can't exist or whatever. Like you don't want to go down that road. You want to leave room. You want to leave the door ajar for good people, no matter who they are. But I think it's just this broader vision that has taken hold, and it's the news organizations have this way of presenting things or curating things. Sowell calls it filtering information to present a certain vision to the world. And you have the institutions now, the primary and higher education, which are saying, we're going to educate the kids in this particular way. We have our entertainment and art apparatus, which is going this particular way, which is dominated by this sort of point of view. And the compound effect is that the culture keeps moving in one direction. And so I just think that it's never an outdated conversation because we're talking about these sort of timeless intellectual, ideological battles, and they're playing themselves out, I think, in very, very maybe part of the conflict feels intensified because, again, it goes back to this technology, and we feel so connected to it. Because I tell you, I can assess pretty quick. I can assess pretty quickly when what someone's sort of worldview is, in a conversation, and even then, it doesn't really ruin the vibe if you're just talking one-on-one with a person, because I think at the end of the day, we all agree on like about 85% of things, and there's some really intense wedge issues that we may never agree on. But at the end of the day, I mean, these are just timeless. These are psychological issues and conflicts, and emotional issues and conflicts, and battles that are that will never die, and they're just being re-expressed in different ways. And that's why, I think stories and art are so powerful, because they capture these kinds of things. And I get very frustrated by conservatives who continue to ignore this aspect of life and civilization. It's like, no, the art really matters, because the art is how we encode all these sort of conflicts. Like we know all this stuff and how it's going to play out if we paid more attention. But I sort of went off the rails there. I don't know if I answered your questions, but this is just, it's a very disorganized time.
Clifton, let's talk about your art and in particular your work on the Thomas Sowell project. John's going to have to go in a few minutes, so we're going to need to wrap up. But tell us where that stands now, what you're thinking about.
I'm thinking about a lot of things, actually. So, it's very ambitious originally. I was like, I'll have a draft in 6 months. But the more I began to read and the more I began to explore, it's at the point now where I feel like I might have two plays in my head right now. And one is the solo project. And John and I spoke with you about this, where, I said, I don't want it to be just a biographical exploration, because you can just watch, read his memoir for that. It needs to be a thrilling piece of live theater. At the same time, what I became very, very energized by. And for those who want to check out the process, just go to becomingsoul.substack.com. I'm documenting part of my process there and writing out my thoughts. But there's a
Becoming Soul. That's SOWELL.
Yes, becomingsoul.substack.com. And a book that Sowell wrote back in 1974, which is very, very difficult to find now. It's called Black Education, Myths and Tragedies. And that book is really interesting because he chronicles what happened in, let me start back at the beginning, because I get excited talking about this stuff. Okay, I get ahead of myself. So I had very good advice from a friend of mine who said, don't try to put his whole life into one evening. You have a show like Thurgood, for instance, which Lawrence Fishburne did 10 years ago, which is really, really good. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. And that was a show where if you don't know who Thurgood Marshall was or don't know his life, it tells it, all the cool stuff from beginning to end and that sort of a thing. For me, I had a friend who said, just focus on one specific moment in his life. And so that moment for me is the 1960s. And the convenient thing about Sowell's life is that since he was born in 1930, his life, you can divide it very, very, very evenly by decades. And the 1960s is a great moment because you want your characters to be going through the worst possible time. You want to beat your characters into submission. That's the greatest point of drama. And so in the 1960s, especially the late 1960s, his first marriage was, kind of crumbling. He's still trying to establish himself in the academic field, but finding that his passion for making students think and for pushing students to do their work the way that he had to do their work, it's not popular among students or the faculty who keep interfering with him. And so he's getting all this sort of bureaucratic pushback. And so he hates that and wants to get out of that world. And then there's the social upheavals that were going on. So in late 1969, at Cornell University in April, there was an uprising at Willard Straight Hall, one of the administrative buildings where these armed students came in.
Yeah.
And yeah. So people know about this. It's a big deal. And Sowell happened to be teaching there at the time. And so right now, where I am in my process is like, okay, there's two plays here potentially for me. One is the solo play, which I think can blend biographical details and his work and his ideas and that evolution there, which is an exploration of a man who is wrestling with his ideological evolution and his doubts. But then there's this other play, which I think is also very exciting, based around these events in 1969. And I say that because of this. This event at Cornell, Sowell calls it the day that Cornell died. There's a great book called Cornell 69 by, I think it's Donald Downs is his name, who was there at the time. He's a student there. And the uprising in 69 is often he frames it, and I think it's an interesting framing, as this clash between the ideals of free expression and the exploration of ideas on a college campus and the rise of racial justice politics. This is 1969. And so there's a timely element, I think, to it. And there's an exciting opportunity there to talk about, to explore these conflicting visions, which is what a great conflict is, and at the core of any story. And so what you had there is you had people like Sowell who were in the minority who were sort of saying, let's focus on the academics and let's push these students and let's not get so much involved in politics. And his own ideas were changing about the civil rights movement and its efficacy at the time. And then you had, the rising tide of this vision that was emerging, which he calls the civil rights vision at that time. And everything I think that we're sort of experiencing now can be put in this particular play and can be used. It's such a monumental turning point, both in history and in his life, that I said that has to be where the story begins. And then you build that outward. You build that, you find what that structure is, what the story has to do emotionally and intellectually and psychologically. And that's the exciting part. You hear me stuttering talking about it. And but it's very, very difficult. And there's a lot of material because you're dealing with these clash of ideas and the history of these ideas and their development. There's a great book that Sowell wrote called On Classical Economics. And in the preface, he talks about how the history of economics is really the history of ideas. And that was Sowell's original sort of focus when he was studying when he was younger, was the history of ideas. And so then it's like, okay, are we going to talk about Marxism and markets and Sowell's evolution there? Are we going to talk about the clash between the sort of left-wing vision or the vision of the anointed and the vision of the benighted, or the constrained vision? So there's a lot of red meat ideologically. The challenge there is saying, okay, what's the psychology underneath all of this? Who is Sowell really? What's his emotional makeup? And expressing him that way. Sowell the character as opposed to Sowell the man. What dramatic liberties do I need to take in order to structure a piece or create a piece, compose a piece that has the greatest emotional impact? And that's the very, very difficult part that I'm negotiating right now with all these ideas floating around.
Clifton, have you read Mark Whitaker, former editor of Newsweek, Black man, has written a lot of books, especially lately, but he did one a few years ago called Saying It Loud, 1966, the year that, and then something about civil rights movement and Black power. And he captures that era perfectly because, yes, everything I've often said and been told I was oversimplifying that everything changed in 1966. And I know that it's not that precise, but that era with Cornell exploding like that and Sowell being there, that atmosphere begins in 1966. And Whitaker did a really good book exploring how we went from the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 5 to what do we want, Black power, which, hasn't really created much. I thought it was a good read.
Yeah. There's a very powerful, I just looked that up. There's a very powerful book that Sowell wrote, which also inspired me deeply, called Civil Rights. This is 1984. The subtitle is called Rhetoric or Reality.
Rhetoric or Reality.
Yes. And it's a very short volume, very easy to read. And, so the concept of the civil rights vision, I stole from that book and was inspired by that because, I go back to what I was saying earlier. I think that what Sowell conceptualized as the civil rights vision is really being challenged right now. And if I could remember what his premises were of the vision, there were three central premises. Something about political action is the most valuable action. Any disparity between groups is caused by discrimination. And I think another one is like the innate inferiority of groups determines policy or something like that. I might be bastardizing it a little bit, but he talks about how this vision was developed specifically for the special case of Blacks, who are a special case in this country. But then it was generalized for other groups, women, gays. Now we see other sexual minorities as well. The differently abled, and I think part of the pushback we're seeing widespread now to kind of bring it back a little bit is a response to that civil rights vision and what Sowell was warning about it in the preface. I mean, Glenn, I'm sure you've read it, but he says, some books you write for the pleasure of them, and some of them have to be written because no one else will say them, and you have the sense enough to not worry about what people care about it. But this idea of this collapsing vision being challenged and the impact that vision had on American society for the next 60 years, I think is a very, very, a very rich and exciting realm to explore in terms of to explore dramatically. And so that's what
there needs to be a play about that.
Yeah. So that's the difficulty because that could be that play. But what people were looking for and asking for was the solo show, which in concept alone is really, really fun. So it's like, I won't say I've bitten off more than I can chew. I didn't realize just how big the plate was, but I'm going to finish the food because it's really, really good.
Are you at the point of writing a script? You got words on a page kind of thing?
No, I've got a rough outline and a structure, which took a very long time. I think my big fear right now is one. I think there's is it the ego that drives the perfectionism? That there's the fear of setting things down, and it's the paralysis from analysis. Because I'm daunted, if I'm being frank, because he's such a titanic figure. But I also want to make sure that the ideas that are expressed are given their full weight, and not just from one side of the aisle. I think what's great about Sowell is that even when he was a diehard Marxist, he was still reading Edmund Burke, and he still wanted to work or learn from George Stigler. He still wanted to go to the University of Chicago, which is already a conservative institution. So he's always someone who wanted to assert himself as an independent thinker and as his own man. And I think any piece that has his name or that is inspired by him should have that kind of intellectual texture and weight. So maybe I'm telling myself that because I want to get everything right, and it's keeping me from actually setting pen to paper. But at the same time, it's like, this is a big one. So you got to make sure that that the dramatic weight, the intellectual weight, don't cancel each other out. And so it's lots and lots of like drafting and redrafting an outline and drafting and redrafting possible events, deciding, can I bend the truth here? What facts can I exclude or include here? Should I compress the time here? Like, it's a big process. So I would love to just be. People keep telling me, just write it. And I think they're right in terms of getting out of my head and getting something onto paper, even if it sucks. So the short answer is no. The long answer is like still gathering information to put on the page. But it's just so much fun that I just got caught up in it, I think.
Very exciting. We're all waiting with bated breath. Let me ask you something. I interviewed Jason Riley, Sowell's biographer. The book of Riley's is called Maverick.
Yeah.
And it's a biography of Thomas Sowell. And he said the following. I asked him, what difference did it make to Sowell's career that he's a Black man? And I paraphrased Jason's response in saying, A, he didn't want to write about race, but he felt he had an obligation to write about race. He thought it was his duty because the ideas are too important and the conventional wisdom was too misguided. So he wanted to correct the record, to go on the record to correct the general discussion. And that 1984 book, Civil Rights, Rhetoric, and Reality, I think, embodies that aspiration of his. But the other thing that Jason said was he thought Sowell would be ranked as one of the great minds of the 20th century, just as an economic philosopher, thinker, but that and for example, Nobel honors and such, was denied that because by weighing in on the wrong, quote unquote, the wrong side of the race questions of the debates about civil rights policy, about affirmative action, about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which he had some misgivings about, and so on. He alienated himself from the gatekeepers. He became a kind of persona non grata, and that hurt him in terms of his larger professional evaluation and ambition. And I wonder what you think about that.
I think there's some truth to that. I think that Sowell is going to be one of those people who I view Sowell as the people's intellectual in a way. I think Sowell is somebody who, just because of the breadth and scope of his life experience, that underneath a lot of his work is this deep appreciation and compassion for the experiences of the everyday person. And I think because of his, when I begin work on a character, I start with a sort of simple, broad, thematic overview of that character. And so I was jotting down some ideas about Sowell. And one of those words that came up over and over again was uncompromising. And I think part of whatever it is that that is just built into that man that says, I am going to focus on this particular problem and not let go. I mean, I interviewed, or I spoke to, it wasn't really an interview. I had a call with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's a colleague of Sowell's at Stanford. And he said, and Sowell interviewed him a couple of times. And he said, what I remember is just this focused intensity to the extent where he thought that that Sowell might be like somewhere on the Asperger's spectrum, I think. And but there's that huge focused intensity, that raging fire in his mind, and I sense a huge fury in his work. But it's also it's married. You see in his writing, he's very, very passionate about what he calls a very rigorous, systematic, logical way of thinking. He has a story, one of his in his memoir, about this teacher who he hated when he was like 9 or 10. But that teacher instilled in him a sense of a scientific process and appreciation for it, and testing and retesting hypotheses and evidence and experimenting, and just a very systematic way of doing things. And that comes through in his writing. And so I think his legacy, unfortunately, is not going to be in these hallowed institutions or these awards-giving bodies. I think his main contribution is exposing people to simplifying things so that they were accessible to the masses, and through that ability, his ability to simplify things in a very systematic fashion, express them in a very clean, clear, analytical way. The average trucker now can pick up basic economics and develop an entire concept of how an economy works, from A to Z, because people like Sowell existed. And so even though he may not be recognized by these massive awarding bodies, right now you have people online. There's a whole genre of videos of like young Black people who are reacting to his interviews and saying, wait a minute, I agree with that guy. That guy's making sense. Millions of views, millions and millions of views. And I think it's interesting that he's lived as long as he has because his siblings have suffered heart problems and have all died before him. And he's the last one. And now here he is in the winter of his life, and his ideas now, and his star is really rising. And so I think Sowell might just go down as one of those figures that, it's hard to say, but I think he'll be more appreciated in times to come, rather than while he was here. But the people who appreciate him are people who are outside these institutions. And I think that sort of decentralization of knowledge and appreciation is better for society as a whole. And I think that's going to be his lasting legacy, as opposed to like him going down with Nobels and Pulitzers. And that's just how it is. But I think it's still valuable nonetheless. It's a contribution.
Yeah, I'm going to let that be the last word. John has another appointment. We appreciate your time.
Oh, Clifton. God, are you John McWhorter? Oh, man, the real John McWhorter. Oh, man, it's such an honor to meet you.
Our guest has been Clifton Duncan. He's an actor, and he is in the process of producing a one-man or multiple stage incarnations inspired by the life of Thomas Sowell. Wonderful to hear from you, Clifton. Thanks so much. And we very much look forward to seeing what you come up with in due course.
Definitely.
I cannot wait to share it. It's going to be so wonderful. Glenn, John, wonderful to talk to you gentlemen again. And hopefully I get the pleasure to do so in person soon.
Certainly.
All right. Take care.